What's up, everybody? Phil Mendoza with No Limits Archery again. We've got another bow hunting made simple video for you today, and today we're going to be talking about sights. Welcome back, everybody. Got Bo with me again here today. We're going to talk about probably one of the two more critical components on a modern day compound bow, and one of those is your sight. So of all the critical pieces on a bow, we really need an arrow rest and a sight, right?
Yep.
So when someone's coming in, new shooter, looking at different features as to what they're going to be expecting to, or planning to put on their bow, we've really just got a handful of options, right? So if I was a new shooter and I came to you as asking you for advice as to, hey, I'm a new shooter, I've never bow hunted before, but I'd like to bow hunt out west, haven't shot too much distance. What are some of the questions you may ask me as far as trying to help place me into a good starting point for a sight, and maybe explain one of the two of those options that may come about?
Sure. So first thing I would ask you is what animal are you going to be pursuing, and in what kind of terrain? Okay. The reason why I'd ask you that is, for instance, if you were hunting in the eastern plains of Colorado, let's say hunting antelope, your shots have a tendency to be a little bit further. Okay. So in that instance, one site may lend itself a little bit better to another versus, say, if you're going to go out and hunt elk in the thick dark timber.
So let's just say hypothetical here, right? I'm going to plan on hunting elk and mule deer, and I really don't like a lot of moving parts on my. I just like simple. I want basic. What's one of those sights you may suggest?
So then the site for you, in my opinion, would be a fixed pin sight. You can generally get a fixed pin sight in anything from a single pin all the way up to a 7-pin. Although for a new shooter, the 7 pins might be a little bit more clutter than what would be necessary. So generally speaking, a good rule of thumb, a good fixed 5-pin sight would allow you to sight each pin in within 10-yard increments. So say 20 to 60 yards, which would be a long shot for most newer bow hunters. And when you bring up setting them up in 10-yard increments, basically what a bow sight is establishing a reference that corresponds with the distance, right? Exactly.
So, okay, so not a lot of moving parts. I like that. Okay, so then let's say that, again, the other scenario you mentioned was, hey, potentially somebody that's hunting a little bit flatter terrain, further shots.
Sure.
What's a good sight option for someone like that?
So for something like that, a movable sight. Okay, and what I mean a movable sight is we would have a pin, okay, a sight reference that I can turn a dial on and set to a specific distance. So again, in your instance there, if we're out east hunting antelope, hopefully we've got the ability to range that target and get an exact distance, and we'd be able to use a sight such as this, which happens to be a single pin sight, and we'd be able to actually turn a dial. I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but the entire sight would move down or up depending upon how far your animal is in your initial sight setting. Something like this, a very little clutter, okay, 1 pin, 1 sight reference, what allows us to get the utmost accuracy by setting it to the exact distance of the target.
So just as good as that sight is potentially for far range shooting, actually for someone shooting in a ground blind or tree stand, probably not a bad option either, right?
Absolutely not. If you know roughly the distance that your target's going to be, a game trail, water hole, anything like that, you can set it to the exact distance and be ready to go.
Yeah, and like you had mentioned before on multiple pin options, this sight, single reference, less clutter, simple to identify that spot.
Yep.
All right, so then let's look at kind of the shooter who might be, hey, I'd like to do some long range shooting. I'm going to be doing some potential ground spot and stock shooting, but I want all the bells and whistles.
Sure.
What are we looking at that point?
At that point, you could get what we would call a hybrid style sight. It's still going to have the same technology as a single pin sight that we mentioned earlier, but in this instance would incorporate that, say, fixed 1, 3, 5 pin sight, whatever it may be. And we're going to have multiple sight references in a home position, meaning if I had a 5-pin sight and it was set in 20 to 60, I have all those yardages without ever having to touch anything, okay? But again, if you had that 70, 80-yard shot, or you're a guy that likes to practice long distance to make those close shots easier, we can still turn the dial on the sight and get to that exact yardage.
So the terminology, sometimes you hear these type of sites called a slider or a driver.
Rover,
you know.
yep, anything like that.
And typically what happens, as Bo mentioned, is once you're in your home position with how you sight this sight in, usually it's the bottom pin that's going to correspond with the sight tape to achieve maximum distance. However, you can actually make any sight, any pin correspond with your tape, but to keep it simple, most people use a bottom pin.
Yep.
Right?
Yep, absolutely.
So other than that, there's other features that we're going to get into in another video on sights, but this video is more talking about, you know, different options from a single to multiple pin sight and how to start thinking about what you're going to need for your hunt, because at the end of the day, there's not a right or wrong answer for anybody. It really is trying to identify your terrain, your animal you're going to type of hunt, and the type of animal you're going to hunt, and what's best going to suit your style of hunting in those conditions. So if you ever have any questions, don't hesitate when you go into any pro shop. If you come into No Limits Archery, we try to help walk you through this process. But again, this video is designed for new bow hunters and, you know, those of you who've been bow hunting for any time alike, to just understand that there's options, you know, and maybe a change in sight at some point for somebody who's been bow hunting for a while. A lot of new features on the market, so don't be afraid to ask. Hopefully this quick video helped explain a few things, and hopefully we'll see you soon on our next video.